Hello, everybody. So once again, I'm using Zoom to record this video lecture here. And today we're going to be taking a look at multiple civilizations, actually. All three of these are ones that we don't have as much sort of written data for. We may have written languages, but we're unable to translate them, or we don't have written languages at all. So for these civilizations, we have less data to go on. That said, I want to give them, as much of a chance as possible to shine and to, really make it clear what we know about them and who they were and what their deal was. So we're going to hop around the world today, and then next time we'll come back to a video lecture for China. I should mention, by the way, that I'm going to have another professor listening in or joining our Zoom meeting next time. For when we do China. So we're going to have an observation session. So that'll just be one of the other teachers taking a look in. So she pretty much won't be really a concern for you guys, more a concern for me. So I just wanted to let you know, though, so you don't wonder who this person is who's joining our class next time. So I'll see you then for that meeting on China. But for this meeting, let's go on our little world tour of India and two civilizations in the Americas. Okay, so with that, let's switch over to Google Earth so we can see what we're looking at here. All right, should be screen sharing now. So once again, we are taking a look at the original River Valley civilizations. We'll get back to the Americas over here in just a second. But going back to this part of the world, previously we were looking at Egypt, and we were looking at Mesopotamia over here. Now if we turn this right side up, if we keep going, we'll go past the area of Persia, which we'll talk about later, and we'll get to India. So we're kind of working our way east here. So here's the continent or subcontinent, as they say, of India, this region that's bordered by the Himalayas here and by a very important river over here. And this is the river that we're going to be talking about today. This is the River Valley civilization for the original Indus Valley civilization. It's tempting to call it Indian civilization, as we're going to see how strong the connections are between Indian civilization, as we know, the culture of India and the people of India and Hindu religion and stuff like that. How much is that actually connected to the culture that lived in this region? We're not 100% sure, but I'm going to talk about both today, and hopefully we can see if we can draw our own conclusions here and see what you guys think in the discussions today. Okay. So yeah, this is the Indus River right here. And the words India and Hindu all come from the name of this river. And also Sindh is the name of this part of the valley here. The lower part is known as the Sindh, and that also comes from the name of this river, all having that Ind sound. The irony is that today it's in Pakistan. But India and Pakistan have cooperated on the archaeology of this region, which they don't cooperate on too much, but they cooperate on that because they know that's important to both of them. Okay, so let's switch over to the PowerPoint from here. Go through the whole process there. Share the screen over to the PowerPoint. All right. So let's talk about India, and then we'll get into talking about the Americas in the next video. Okay. So yes, once again, here's a map of the Indus Valley area. It's particularly this region right around the Indus that we're talking about here, although the civilization in this region spreads to the whole subcontinent here. And this civilization has been called the Mohenjo-Daro civilization or the Harappa civilization, because these are the two big cities that really kind of dominated the region. There's a lot of little cities as well, but these are two of the biggest ones. And so they were discovered first, and the civilization was named after them. And this is kind of contemporary to the Sumerians, stretching until later time periods. We're looking at the 3000s and going up to about the 1700s BCE. So this is still a long way before the year 0 by our reckoning, which is the birth of Jesus. So we're talking 3,300 years before Jesus. And BC is, before Christ, and BCE is before Common Era. You can use either one. Historians debate on which one they want to use. But really, this civilization peaks later on kind of after the 2700s into the 1500s. So start small, but builds up to something much bigger. And if you look at a map like this, you can see all sorts of important dots along the river here and the kind of region that we're looking at. And the black dots being the smaller cities and the red dots being the bigger cities. Here's Harappa up near the top here, and Mohenjo-Daro down further to the bottom here. And these being important cities in this civilization. But who were these folks? Once again, yeah, here it is in the region of Pakistan today, in the city, country of Pakistan today. So who were the people of Mohenjo-Daro? We'd like to know more. They had a language, written language, but we have so far been unable to read it. It's kind of like, you know, a code to us that we haven't been able to crack. But we do know a lot about the city from the archaeology. So if we take a look at Mohenjo-Daro, which was really, sliding far ahead here, which was really established around the 2500s, or most successful around the 2500s, we can tell some things about that civilization. The name is kind of what people in later generations called it, which could mean either Mound of the Dead or Mound of Krishna. So it was buried underneath this mound, and then archaeologists started investigating there because they figured you'd probably find a city under a shape like that. And we know that these folks had a lot of organization. They used tools and measurements to measure out their city, which the Mesopotamians did as well. But these guys had even more of a grid plan. They had streets that were at perfect right angles to each other, which is something that we're used to in our modern times, but is something that doesn't always happen in ancient times. In ancient times, cities tend to kind of spring up randomly. But this shows, you know, a level of deliberateness. So this city was not their first city. It was planned out and designed very deliberately and specifically. We have a lot of granaries, a lot of places storing grain for food. There seem to be dispensers for flood. It seems like flooding was something that they encountered sometimes. They had weights and measures, ways of, you know, telling how much gold was in something and how to measure out the prices of everything. So they had, you know, a degree of figuring that out for economic reasons as well. And again, that kind of scientific mindset. And I think the most interesting thing is that they had a really elaborate plumbing system. They had rooms where you could not exactly flush a toilet, but have water carry your waste away. And so, you know, lead that to a kind of sewer. So they had quite a lot figured out. And they had wells that you could draw on for water and irrigation that was really elaborate as well. So these folks have really mastered the art of moving water around. Now, one of the interesting things about them is that their city doesn't have a whole lot of walls. Usually city walls kind of suggest that a particular city is going up to battle against other cities quite often. And there were a lot of city walls in Mesopotamia. Every city had walls and they were all confronting each other constantly. But these guys didn't have really significant walls, which suggests that they were doing pretty well for themselves and they didn't have to worry about being invaded. Their position was pretty secure. And there were also a lot of toys that children seem to play with. So that also suggests, you know, a time that they were really doing quite well for themselves. We think there are some texts that refer to a city of the roosters, which might be this city, Mohenjo-Daro. Later texts suggest that this might be what they're talking about. And if it's the city of the roosters, it might be because they used roosters and chickens for religious ritual purposes, but also perhaps engaged in the sport of cockfighting. So they used animals to fight each other, which is considered animal cruelty today, but that seems to have been part of their culture. But yeah, even though we don't know as much about them as we'd like, we can catch glimpses of them. Here's another view that kind of shows the grid plan a little bit better, shows the foundations here, just how regular this city was laid out, these buildings with a lot of extremely square rooms, all very figured out and all very deliberate and methodical. We have like bathing rooms, which is something that other civilizations like the Romans are known for. You know, people would get here and be in like a public sort of mini swimming pool here, or at least that's the theory anyway. It could have been a private swimming pool, but you know, again, that ability to move water around, which is pretty cool. So there's a big debate over what happened to Mohenjo-Daro. Originally, you know, back in the day, people used to think that was destroyed by invaders. And this is part of a really big debate as to whether this culture is connected to a later Indian culture, or is it's kind of its own thing that got taken over by later Indian culture. But people used to think that it was destroyed by invaders, because we do know that there are people who migrated into this region. But nowadays, people think it's more likely that they were destroyed by some kind of drought or famine. And what people notice is that it doesn't seem like the people go away, just the city goes away. People abandoned the city and went and built other ones later on. And that might mean that they grew into the later Indian culture, that the later Indian culture, is closely connected, continues on from this one. But it's a topic of pretty big debate. Another major site for this is Harappa, which is the one that's further north here. And again, they have that very a deliberate grid plan, and stairways, which is pretty cool. All sorts of cool stuff going on, and seems like a pretty similar culture from what we can tell to the one at Mohenjo-daro. If we want to call this the Indus Valley culture, that might be a good name for it. Some of the things we see there, we see some beautiful pottery with these sort of geometric style designs. We found some interesting artifacts and statues, like this one, which might be some sort of wise man or sage. Might be a priest, priest being pretty important to later Indian religion. People called him, when they first found him, the priest king, but we're pretty sure these days that there weren't actually any priest kings in the Indus Valley civilization, or at least we don't know of any. And that's way more a Mesopotamia thing. So people just, people used to just find artifacts and name them whatever. But I think there's a pretty good case for calling this guy a wise man or some kind of sage or somebody who's meditating, maybe. We have the dancing girl, which you might have seen this in the book. We don't know if she's really dancing, but she seems like she might be a beautiful girl who's kind of designed to dance. Trying to dance in front of men. This nice little figurine that's very well designed here. Simple and pretty small. It's only 4 inches tall, but they're still able to get a lot of detail there. And we can even kind of get a sense of some of the clothes that a young woman like this might have worn. And this comes from Mohenjo-daro. We also find a little statuette of these oxen pulling a plow and attached by a yoke, which gives us some sort of sense of technology there. Maybe kind of related to chariots, I'm not 100% sure, but chariots are important in India as well. Basically doing this, but with horses and no plow. So they could plow their fields. That gives us a sense of what their agriculture was like. We have this really weird, abstract, but very interesting statue that people called the Mother Goddess. And people have wondered if this is, a goddess connected to, later Indian religion, one of the goddesses from that religion, or possibly a woman, portrait of a woman, maybe a self-portrait, a woman making a portrait of herself, or possibly, this is a priestess who's being depicted here. Could be any of those. But again, we get kind of a sense of, the jewelry there that's being modeled. So it's pretty cool to see all the stuff that can be found at Mohenjo-daro. And again, like I said, the writing system, we wish we knew what this was saying right here. We can tell just by the patterns that are there that this is, something like letters or syllables marked out with these signs here. This isn't just random. It follows regular patterns that suggest a language. But so far, nobody's been able to really crack it. One thing we do know and have a pretty convincing argument for is that the ancient Mesopotamian civilizations connected with this civilization. The Akkadians, in their records, kept track of this. And Akkadians, we can read their language. So they traded with a civilization that they called Meluha. And Meluha seems to have been, based on everything we can tell, right where the Indus Valley civilization was. So we know at least that they were part of these big trading networks, which is pretty cool. Okay, so at this point, there's kind of a break in the timeline in terms of talking about Indian history. And what we encounter next are the Vedas. So the Vedas are the earliest holy book of Indian religion. they are sacred texts that describe the ways of worshiping the gods. And these ways of worshiping the gods are kind of earlier archaic ways that aren't as used in the modern day and refer to kind of older gods who don't see as much worship anymore. But they kind of describe these rituals and how you do them, and they describe, by doing that, this culture that existed at a certain time. But this is later than the Indus Valley civilization. This is like the 1500s to the 500s. We're going to look at how that culture evolves today. But we would like to be able to say that we can use it to get some insight into the Indus Valley culture as well. It's just the debate is there a straight continuous line from the Indus Valley culture to this culture, or is there some kind of break due to invasion or a decline and then a kind of recovery of the size of the population, stuff like that. But we know that this is kind of the founding document of the religion Hinduism, which is the religion of all the different gods of India. It's a very open religion that's polytheistic and can incorporate many gods and many interpretations of those gods, but it's also got some common ideas throughout. It's not just about that. There's some ideas that kind of recur through all these different gods. And it starts with the Vedas. Yeah, we would like to know, did the Vedas come from the Mohenjo-daro people, or did they come from new people who came in from outside, which we're going to talk about in a second? So some of the major gods that we see in the Vedas are Indra. Indra is kind of a classic patriarchal god. He is associated with the sky. He is kind of the father. He is the chief of the tribe. He is the leader of the family. And he goes off and he fights other cultures, and the people who worship Indra would go on raids and steal other people's cows and things like that. We also have the god Agni, god of fire, and fire is very important in the Vedas because that's what you do to make a sacrifice of an animal to the gods. That's the primary ritual, is sacrificing animals and then kind of burning things up in the fire to the gods and, cooking some meat so that you can eat it. We also see Rudra, who is a storm god. And Rudra, most people don't pray for him to do nice things. They pray for him to leave them alone because he's going to, trash their crops and destroy them and be very destructive and terrifying. But people think that he evolves into a god called Shiva, who is a lot more positively viewed. But is also a god of destruction. So maybe this god of destruction started off as a god that you wanted to avoid, but later on became one that people felt very more positive about. Now the thing is, these rituals are not for everybody. There's a certain caste, a certain group of people organized by blood who are supposed to be the leaders, who are supposed to be the only ones who do these rituals and read these texts. They might be the only ones who are allowed to be leaders, or at least they're at the top of the upper class. And at the top of the upper class, your job is to take care of the human relationship to the gods. So I guess it's not priest king so much as a priest aristocracy, I guess you could say. So it's important to remember that these texts are for these folks called Brahmins. Okay, so let's get into these Indo-Europeans. These are the people who migrated into India. And we don't really know what the Indo-Europeans called themselves. We have some guesses, but we don't know for sure. And we call them Indo-Europeans because they are the ancestors of a lot of different groups of people in Europe and India. And also in the region of Turkey, a little bit in Persia, places like that, in Greece, all these different parts of the world. But they spread as far as India. The Indian language Sanskrit is very closely related to their language, and as are a lot of languages in Europe. So there are some connections between all these languages, and probably a connection between all these populations as well. If we look at different languages, we can actually see some relationships between the different languages that are part of the Indo-European family of languages. Like, for instance, that in Sanskrit, foot is pad, and in Greek it's pod, and in Latin it's ped, and so on and so forth, which if you twist it far enough gives foot, pat, pud, food, something like that in English. An even clearer one is that all their words for the number 3 are all the same. So you can follow these connections, and you can learn some things about these cultures and where they all started from. For instance, that the names of their sort of father gods who are associated with the sky are all related. that their words for snow are all related. So this was a people who had seen snow before, things like that. So it's pretty cool what you can learn just from the way languages are related. But this is like our big look into the Indo-Europeans, and the other big one is DNA testing. We can kind of follow the populations a little bit. Not to say that they're one coherent race, but we can tell that certain people are related to each other. Now, the big debate has a lot to do with the caste system. So I mentioned that the Brahmins are the priestly caste that's on top, and there's two other castes that are relatively well off as well. You have the warriors, who are known as the Kshatriyas, and the Vyashyas are landowners, sometimes translated as merchants. So the Brahmins do religion, the Kshatriyas do military stuff, and the Vyashyas do economic stuff, and kind of form those pillars of society. But they are the minority compared to everyone else. The Shudras are the peasants, and then there are also a group of people known as the untouchables, who you're not even really supposed to interact with in the caste system. They are people who are out of the caste or somehow considered worse than peasants. And then over time, within these different groups, you get more groups going on. For instance, within the landowner caste, you might have the candy maker caste and the shoemaker caste and things like that. So this is a concept of social roles that are very much predetermined. People aren't sort of supposed to marry outside of them, and people aren't supposed to really interact outside of them. But everybody knows what their role in society is supposed to be. And of course, for the people on top, they have roles that are most enjoyable, whereas the people below are the workers, which is something that we see in many societies, but it's not quite so formally worked out. And one theory that people have is that the Indo-Europeans came in and they set themselves up as the people on top. They took over, they conquered, and these would be the people who are described as nobles of noble birth, which is the word Arya in the Vedas. That's the theory anyway, and that was the original theory. Nowadays, we're not so sure if that's really true. And the part of the problem is that a bunch of racist people really wanted to believe that that was true. They believed in this idea of Aryans setting up a perfect society. The original idea of Aryan was just a name for Indo-Europeans, but certain people hijacked this idea and came up with this idea, oh, these Indo-Europeans, they were white people, and all the good stuff in the world comes from the white people. And needless to say, that is not actually the way it works. And in fact, the Indo-Europeans, we now are pretty sure were not actually white people. They were brown-skinned. And so all of that is bunk. But if you're wondering how Hitler got connected to weird, obscure points of ancient Indian history, this is how. But yeah, so partially because we realized that people really wanted to believe in this conquest idea, we started to question that idea. And nowadays, there's a lot of theories that that might not have been the case. I mean, it is possible to still have that theory without looking at it from the extremely racist point of view and just saying, one group of people conquered another. But it's also entirely possible that the Veda culture, the religion and Hindu religion, and what we think of as Indian culture came from the people who were already there, the Mohenjo-Daro type people, and that the Indo-Europeans, they didn't conquer, they merged with the existing culture. And we're pretty sure these days that the cities weren't destroyed by invasion necessarily. The cities had to do more with, their decline had to do more with the environment around them. And we know that they built new cities and kind of continued on. So there's a lot to think about here. But this is why there's kind of a debate. And people debate like, how much does Hindu religion come from this Indus Valley civilization, and how much does it come from these Indo-Europeans who came in later? It's kind of hard to say. Looking at Indus Valley culture, there are some things that seem to be indications of maybe something to do with the Hindu culture? For instance, this seal that was used by the Indus Valley culture to, mark documents in clay, could be an image of someone meditating. He has his legs cross-legged, like he's like a sage would do while meditating. He has the horns of a bull, which are associated with Shiva, and he has multiple faces, which are associated with, I think, Shiva and also Brahma, so later Hindu gods. And his pose seems like maybe he's meditating too. So this would be maybe one piece of evidence to say, that this sort of Hindu culture was already there among the Mohenjo-darans. Okay, so there's a lot more we can say about Hindu culture. And if we look at later Hindu culture, we can see some of the stuff that might have been going on in the Indus Valley culture. But just keep in mind that we are kind of trying to look backwards and project backwards. So it's a lot of guesswork. But one thing that is really distinct about the Hindu religion is its relationship with transcendence. They're kind of, instead of just having this idea of like one transcendent God, it's more an idea that the universe is this one transcendent thing. This is called pantheism, that all the universe is God or somehow a divine energy or divine force. It doesn't even have to have a name. The name for it in Hinduism is Brahman. So Brahman is the whole universe, the energy of the universe. And in Hinduism, we are all one. Every different thing in the universe is part of this greater Brahman. And to connect with the gods is to recognize that you are part of this Brahman, to meditate and to connect your individual Atman, your soul, yourself, with this larger Brahman, and recognize that you're a part of it. And along the way, you can recognize that the Brahman kind of created you, and you can recognize maybe that the gods are also part of Brahman, and when you're worshiping them, you're worshiping the whole. So the gods kind of blend together because they're all part of this whole. And to some extent, maybe human beings can be more connected to the gods that way. So we are all Brahman in Hindu religion. Yes, oh, there's that word, pantheism again. Okay, getting into some of the details of later Hindu religion, we have basically three really important gods who, at some point, they officially start being grouped together as a kind of trinity. You don't just have to worship this trinity, but you can, and a lot of people do. Still do today, it's still very active. And these are Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. So Brahma, not to be confused with Brahman, but kind of conceptually related, Brahman is the creator. Brahman is the one who creates the universe or takes the universe and shapes it into its current form, creates sort of the different phenomena that are out there. But maybe, the universe already existed, but he just shaped it, or he created the universe. Now, the funny thing is, you'd think that he would be worshipped as like, the most important god, but that's kind of our bias in our culture talking. Brahma is usually worshipped with the other two and rarely by himself because he's kind of a background element. And he's not as active in human lives because all he did was sort of create, and then he sat back and watched the rest of it take place. But he has some interesting iconography. One thing you see in a lot of Hindu religion iconography is multiple arms, which shows having a lot of power that you can reach in different directions at once and have different tools at your disposal. Brahma has, like I alluded to previously, he has 4 heads, so he can face all directions at once and see everything in the whole universe. And the symbols that he holds in his hands usually have to do with energy and power. Okay, now here's one that's really popular for worship, and this is Vishnu. Vishnu is the preserver. So he is the god who maintains the universe and comes into it incarnation. As an incarnation, he takes a human form. That's an incarnation. And he will become a great hero to fight against evil monsters or forces that threaten the universe, threaten existence. So the preserver kind of watches over the evil in the world and thwarts it at various times. And he becomes these great heroes. These heroes are known as avatars, and some of the names of them are names like Rama or Krishna. Krishna is especially popular. Sometimes Vishnu is just worshipped as Krishna. Vishnu, interestingly, is usually depicted with having dark features or even more often blue features. That's kind of how you know it's him. And he sort of shapes the form of the universe, and his symbols are battle and authority and knowledge. And you can see how different religions would kind of fuse together. This is a process known as syncretism, when you fuse different religions together. Say one group of people were worshiping Rama and another group of people were worshiping Krishna, you could say they're the same guy. They're different versions of this guy, Vishnu. And then, of course, we have Shiva, the destroyer. A lot of people say Shiva. If you actually go to India, the more correct pronunciation is Shiva. And Shiva is the destroyer. But unlike Rudra, the storm god, who you were afraid he was going to destroy your crops and you want him to stay away, Shiva is actually a very positive force. He's like the best possible interpretation of destruction. Now he's scary, but he's scary in a good way. He's very powerful and he cares about people. That's why he's, using his power to destroy the universe, kind of out with the old, in with the new. So he dances a dance of destruction, and the beat of his drum represents time passing. So the world decays, the world changes, but ultimately that's seen as a good thing. Probably because, when old things go away, new things can come about. And Shiva is an important part of the process of the world. And it's there's a challenge that Shiva is giving you, is to look past your frustration with things being destroyed and to embrace that process. But Shiva is also kind of a warrior. He's known for fighting demons. He has the ability to go to battle. But at the same time, he's a sage. He is very much all about meditation and religion. So he is always meditating to get closer to that sort of universal oneness, Brahman. And he is kind of someone who can be your guide to doing that. Shiva is very androgynous. Sometimes he's depicted both male and female. Sometimes Shiva is depicted as a fusion down the middle with his wife Parvati, who is also a very talented meditator. And his symbols have to do with bowls, the moon, meditation, and fire and dance and destruction. And he is very frequently depicted dancing. Okay, so those are the three big gods that I wanted to mention. As Hindu religion develops later on, we find new texts coming along, like another one after the Vedas is the Upanishads. And they continue to develop these ideas. So whereas the Vedas were mostly just about how to worship the gods, the Upanishads have this idea of Brahman, which is so important, that all the gods are one and that everything is connected. And that if we recognize this, we can merge together like rivers do in the sea and connect to our own religion, to pure existence itself. So the Upanishads are kind of the next step on the path, and are really popular today, probably more popular than the Vedas in terms of sort of more the current interpretation of religion. And a lot of people find them very inspiring. Okay, and I also want to mention, before we finish up with India, two epic poems that appear. Now, these appeared later on, but some of these myths were probably going on in really ancient times and may be connected in various ways to the most ancient Indian religion. So one is called the Mahabharata, which is the deeds of the Bharata family. So the Bharata family are this family that go to war, and they actually go to war with each other. Another name is the Kuru family. And they are sort of dueling over who will take the throne of the most powerful kingdom. And this is an epic poem. We're going to see some other epic poems, like the Epic of Gilgamesh was one that we looked at in the context of Mesopotamia. The Mahabharata features Vishnu in his form of Krishna. So Krishna is maybe most known from this story. Some of his greatest deeds appear in this story, but he's not exactly the protagonist. He's more like one of the heroes who are involved in the story. And at the end, the king is reluctant to take his throne because he's so sick of all the fighting. But the people around him convince him that he has to do his duty. And this concept of duty is very important in this whole context. You have your duty to your caste. You have your